The first scream didn't come from the snow. It came from inside the fortress, where the iron gates were already opening and the whole court was already gathering, because someone had found Lady Isolde Valorn, barefoot and half-dead, leaning against the outer wall like a discarded relic. Torches flared. Guards shouted. Nobles in velvet cloaks arrived with hungry eyes. And then the crowd saw the impossible. A human girl shaking so hard her teeth clicked, holding the former queen upright with arms that looked too thin to keep anyone alive. The girl's lips were blue, her hair was crusted with ice, yet her hands stayed locked around Isolde's shoulders like a promise. "Mom," the girl whispered into the old vampire's ear, voice cracking, "don't sleep. Please don't sleep." That one word, "Mom," hit the courtyard like a blade. Because the moment Darius Valorn, vampire king of the Western Territories, stepped through the gate and heard it, his face didn't show rage first. It showed shock. Then something worse, fear. The kind that made his soldiers stop breathing. Darius crossed the snow in 3 silent steps, coat snapping behind him like a shadow. His guards tried to block him, protocol, purity, contamination, but he shoved them aside without even looking. He stared at his mother's bare feet bleeding into the snow, then at the girl's trembling arms, and his voice came out low and dangerous. "Who touched her?" a noble answered quickly, eager to please. "The human. She's been holding Lady Isolde for—" Darius didn't let him finish. His eyes fixed on the girl not like prey but like a question he couldn't solve. "What is your name?" The girl blinked, as if she'd forgotten names still mattered in a world that didn't want her. "Nyra," she rasped. "Nyra Holloway." Isolde lifted her head weakly and smiled at the girl like she recognized warmth more than faces. "My good girl," she murmured, confused and tender. "You came back." The court murmured, disgusted and fascinated. A human in vampire territory was already a scandal. A human calling the queen mom was a sin. 8 hours earlier, Nyra had stood outside Mercy Street shelter staring at a handwritten sign that might as well have been a death sentence. Full. No expectations. She'd waited 3 hours in a line that didn't move, watching other people press their hands to the glass and beg. The director didn't argue. He just flipped the sign and killed the lights like he was turning off hope. The storm swallowed the street. Nyra checked her pocket again even though she already knew the number. $17.38. Not enough for a bed. Not enough for a hot meal. Just enough to remind her she was still alive, which sometimes felt like an insult. She pulled her coat tighter, stolen 2 winters ago from a donation bin, torn now at the seams, and started walking because walking meant blood moved, and blood moving meant you didn't die. She walked through the human district where windows glowed gold with dinners she would never taste. She walked past couples laughing under warm lights, past a child squealing over a new toy, and she didn't hate them. Hate took energy. She was saving energy for survival. In her backpack she carried 2 shirts, 1 dented bottle, a rusted pocket knife she'd never used but couldn't throw away, and a single photo wrapped in plastic, her mother smiling like the world hadn't broken yet. When Nyra's fingers brushed the photo, the past slammed into her like a door. She was 12 again, chained in a stone cell that reeked of blood and fear. The brand burned into her shoulder blade while vampires laughed about inventory. Her mother's voice echoed from that last night. "Stay invisible, Nyra. Invisible means alive." Nyra had obeyed for 15 years. But storms don't care about rules, and the wind pushed her deeper into streets she didn't recognize until the buildings changed. The walls grew taller. The gates turned to iron. The air started humming with wards that made her skin crawl. Vampire territory, the forbidden district, the place humans disappeared. Panic sparked in her chest. She tried to turn back, but the storm thickened into white blindness, and her body was already doing that dangerous thing, going numb. Numb wasn't relief. Numb was the beginning of the end. She told herself she would cut through quickly, find an alley, curl up behind a dumpster, and become invisible again. Then she saw it, the largest stronghold in the district, black stone, high walls, watchtowers like bones, and a service gate standing wide open with a ward light blinking red like a warning. Her survival instinct screamed, "Trap, bait, run." She took 1 step away. Then she heard the sound that didn't belong in a fortress district, crying, thin, old, confused, a voice trembling in the storm. "Richard, where are you? I can't find my way home." Naira froze. Every lesson she'd learned said keep moving. Every scar on her body said don't get involved. But the voice sounded like loneliness, and Naira knew loneliness the way others knew their own name. She turned toward the sound and saw the figure stumbling barefoot through the snow, silver hair, thin silk nightgown, lips turning purple, feet leaving small red stains in the white. Even through the storm, Naira could sense the faint shimmer under the woman's skin. Immortal blood. A vampire. Dying. Naira's hand went to her scar without thinking. The brand, the memory, the rage. Vampires had taken everything from her. Vampires had hunted her mother. Vampires had turned her childhood into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And still, the old woman fell to her knees and whispered, "Please, I can't remember." Something inside Naira cracked, not weakness, not forgiveness, something stubborn and dangerous, compassion. The kind that gets people killed. She stepped through the open gate anyway. Up close, the woman looked even worse. Not powerful, not terrifying, small and lost, like the winter had peeled away the myth and revealed an old person underneath. Her eyes were milky with confusion, but when she looked at Naira, her face softened like she recognized a familiar warmth. "Allah," she breathed. "You came back." Naira swallowed her fear and lied with gentleness because truth didn't matter as much as keeping someone alive. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're not alone." The old woman started shaking violently. Naira yanked out her one blanket, her mother's blanket, the last soft thing she owned, and wrapped it around the stranger's shoulders. Cold punched through Naira's coat instantly. She pulled the woman against her chest anyway, using her own body as a wall against the wind. "We need to get you inside," she said, trying to lift her, but the woman was dead weight and Naira's legs were already going weak. The storm swallowed the world. Naira's vision blurred, her thoughts slowed. She felt that sleepy pull that meant hypothermia was winning. The old woman's head rested against her shoulder and she whispered like a child, "Tell me a story." Naira's lips barely moved. "Once upon a time there was a girl who learned kindness was the only thing no one could steal." The words drifted, broken by shivering. Naira thought, "This is how I die, holding someone who should hate me in a place that wants me dead." And then the footsteps came, fast, heavy, armored. 3 sentinels materialized from the storm, eyes glowing, weapons drawn. They took one look and their faces twisted into rage. "A human is touching the queen," one snarled. Iron hands yanked Naira backward so hard she hit the ice. Pain exploded in her ribs. "Wait," she coughed, crawling forward. "She's freezing, she needs." A boot slammed into her side and stole her breath. Another guard reached for the old woman as if she was an object to reclaim, not a person to save. Naira saw the blanket sliding off the woman's shoulders, saw the old woman sagging without support, and something fierce rose in her chest. She threw herself between them, arms spread wide like she could block immortals with bones and stubbornness. "Don't touch her," she gasped. "She's dying." A fist cracked across Naira's face. Stars burst behind her eyes. Blood filled her mouth, warm against cold, but she didn't move. She stayed there, shaking, refusing to fold. And then a voice cut through the storm, thin but absolute, like command carved into stone. "Stop!" The old woman had somehow stood again, swaying on bare feet, eyes suddenly burning with clarity that didn't belong to confusion. "You will not touch her," Lady Isolde commanded. The sentinels froze, torn between training and shock. Isolde reached toward Naira with trembling fingers. "This child stayed," she whispered, and her voice broke. "When no one else did." Her knees buckled. Naira caught her instinctively, even while bleeding, even while trembling, because some choices become your last real identity. The sentinels lifted them both, frantic now, calling for healers and warmth. Naira's world narrowed to the old woman's breath and the feeling of being carried into darkness. Her last conscious thought wasn't fear. It was surprise, surprise that she had chosen someone else's life over her own. And then she surrendered to black. When Naira woke, warmth wrapped around her like an unreal dream. Thick furs, stone walls lit by enchanted firelight, the smell of clean sheets and wealth she didn't belong near. 2 guards stood at the door like statues. Her ribs screamed when she moved, her face throbbed, her shoulder burned, and then a voice came from the shadows, deep and controlled. "Don't move," it said. "The healer claims you nearly tore yourself apart trying to protect my mother. Admirably stupid." A tall figure stepped into the light. Dark hair, sharp features, eyes that gleamed like a predator but steady. The air itself seemed to stiffen around him. The guards straightened without thinking. Naira didn't need an introduction. "Vampire King," she whispered, voice hoarse. The man studied her like she was a contradiction. "What is your name?" "Naira." "Tell me what happened," he said, and then, softer but more dangerous, "Leave nothing out." Naira told him everything: shelter closed, storm, wrong streets, open gate, old woman dying in snow. As she spoke, his gaze dropped to the brand scar peeking near her collar, and something shifted in his eyes, quick and unreadable. "You knew she was a vampire," he said, not a question. "Yes," Naira admitted. "And you still saved her." He said it like he was tasting poison. "Why?" Naira met his eyes even though every instinct screamed not to. "Because she was alone," she answered. "Because no one else was going to." Silence stretched. Then shouting rose outside the chamber, angry voices, nobles, elders. "The human must die," someone yelled. "Contamination." The king's jaw tightened like stone. He turned toward the door, then looked back at Naira. "Can you stand?" Can you stand?" he repeated, a command disguised as concern. Naira forced herself upright, shaking, pain ripping through her ribs. The king's expression didn't soften, but his voice turned cold and final. "Good," he said. "Because they want to kill you in the dark. I'm going to make them say it in the light." The throne room wasn't just a room. It was a threat made of architecture: black stone columns, vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound, and rows of vampires watching like a courtroom that already decided the verdict. Naira stood in the center, flanked by guards, feeling every immortal gaze slice across her skin. The king sat on an obsidian throne like he'd been carved into it. A robed councilman stepped forward, voice dripping with disgust. "A human touched Lady Isolde. The penalty is death." Murmurs of agreement rolled through the court like thunder. Someone laughed quietly. Someone whispered, "Execute her quickly." Naira's mouth went dry, but she lifted her chin anyway because she'd survived worse than looks. The king's voice cut through the noise. "She saved my mother," the councilman sneered. "She contaminated her." Naira's voice burst out before she could stop it. "Would you have preferred I let her freeze to death?" Every head turned. The guards tensed, ready to strike her for speaking. Naira didn't care. "Would any of you have helped her?" The silence that followed was thick and ugly because it wasn't confusion, it was guilt. "Enough," the king said, and the single word carried power that made the stone feel alive. He stood, descending the steps slowly like a decision becoming a weapon. "Naira Holloway is under my protection," he declared. "Anyone who harms her answers to me personally. Anyone who questions this answers to me personally. This is law." The court went still, shocked. A king protecting a human wasn't mercy, it was insanity. And then the healers wheeled in Lady Isolde, bundled in blankets, eyes lost but searching. She saw Naira and her face softened like the storm had never happened. "Warm girl," she whispered. "Where is my warm girl?" Naira's throat tightened. "I'm here," she said quietly. Isolde's hand lifted toward her like a child reaching for safety. "You stayed," the old queen murmured. "You didn't leave me." The court watched, disturbed, because they weren't watching politics anymore. They were watching something personal, something that didn't obey the rules. After the court was dismissed, Naira expected chains, a cell, torture. Instead, the king's guard escorted her to a guest chamber with a fire and clean bandages. It felt like a trap disguised as comfort. Then, as the door closed, Naira heard the words that changed her blood to ice. Behind a half-open door in the corridor, an elder murmured to the king, "Her condition is accelerating. The ritual you authorized is completing its work." The king's voice came back tight. "Don't say it so loudly." Naira froze. "Ritual authorized, completing." She pressed her palm over her own mouth to keep from making a sound. The queen wasn't just sick. She wasn't just old. She was being erased. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Naira stared at the ceiling while her ribs ached and her mind replayed the queen's confused eyes. In the early morning, guards escorted her politely but with blades to Lady Isolde's chambers. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Books lined the walls. The room smelled like ink and old time. Isolde sat wrapped in blankets, staring out at snow like she was trying to remember what it was called. When she saw Naira, her face brightened. "Warm girl," she said, smiling. "They said you were real. I was afraid I dreamed you." Naira sat carefully across from her. "I'm real." Isolde reached out, fingers shaking, and held Naira's hand like it was an anchor. "Why would you save me?" she asked softly. "You knew what we are." Naira could have lied again. Instead, she told the truth with a steady voice. "Because you were lost," she said, "and I know what it feels like to be lost." For a few minutes, Isolde's mind cleared like fog lifting. Her eyes sharpened and her voice dropped into something older and heavier. "I remember fighting," she whispered. "Fighting to make this court better. Fighting to stop cruelty from becoming tradition." Her gaze drifted toward the door as if she could see the throne room through walls. "I remember my son, and the day he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle." Naira's stomach twisted. "The ritual," she said, barely able to speak. "He did it." Isolde's face didn't harden, it turned sad. "He believed it was mercy," she murmured, "or he wanted to believe." Her hand squeezed Naira's. "Don't hate him too easily, child. He built peace on blood and called it order. It's hard to admit your order is a cage." Naira swallowed hard. "I don't forgive what he did," she said, "but I think he knows it was wrong." Isolde's eyes softened. "That is more than I deserve to hope." The doors slammed open. A captain of the guard strode in, face grim. "Miss Holloway," he snapped, "you must return to your chambers now." Naira stood. "What's happening?" The captain's eyes flicked to Isolde, then back. "A rival covenant is at the gates. They demand an audience, and they specifically demand you." Naira's blood went cold. She knew that fear, the kind that comes with being owned before you're even caught. The throne room filled fast. The messenger arrived wearing ceremonial scars and contempt. "Lord Cassius of the Shadowmere Covenant demands the human called Naira Holloway be surrendered immediately," he announced. "She contaminated Lady Isolde. She threatens immortal purity. Refusal will be considered aggression." The court erupted. "We cannot risk war for a human. Surrender her. Think of our safety." Naira stood very still because she understood something the court didn't. This wasn't about purity. It was about profit. The messenger's eyes pinned her. "Shadowmere also keeps records," he added pleasantly, "especially on escaped property. Naira Holloway, age 12, escaped one of our facilities 15 years ago, destroyed valuable inventory, branded on the shoulder blade." Naira's scar burned like it could hear him. The court stared at her differently now, not just disgust but calculation. A human with a price. Naira stepped forward, voice steady even as terror clawed her throat. "They want me because I escaped," she said. "They want to make an example. They want a profit." Elder Marcus nodded grimly. "Shadowmere controls trafficking in the Eastern Territories." The court's fear shifted into something uglier, self-preservation. "We lose nothing by surrendering one human," a noble said. Naira looked at the king. She expected cold logic. Instead, she saw something tight in his face, anger but also refusal. "No one is being surrendered," he said flatly. Naira swallowed and shook her head. "I'll go," she said, gasps. The king's eyes snapped to her like a whip. "You will not." Naira's hands shook. But she didn't back down. "I won't let people die because of me. I survived them before." The king's voice turned sharp. "You survived at 12 by luck. You won't survive what they do now." Naira's chest rose with one painful breath. "Then at least the bloodshed stops." That's when the midpoint twist hit the room like a thunderclap. Not from an enemy, but from the queen. Healers rolled Lady Isolde forward, and for the first time she looked awake in a way that frightened the court. Her spine was straight. Her eyes were clear. The court fell silent because they hadn't heard her speak like this in years. "No," she said, voice thin but undeniable. "No one is surrendered." The messenger scoffed. "My lady, with respect, respect," Isolde snapped, and the word cut. "Your covenant sells children and calls it management. You want this girl because compassion embarrasses you. Because a homeless human did what none of you did. She saw a life and chose to protect it." She turned her gaze across the court like a blade. "How many of you remember what mercy looks like?" Nobody answered. She looked at her son, and her voice softened into something that hurt more than rage. "If you surrender her, you surrender every value I tried to teach you before I forgot how to fight." The king stood slowly and the room seemed to shrink around him. "Tell Lord Cassius," he said, voice cold enough to freeze blood, "that Miss Holloway is under my protection. If he wants war, he will have it." The messenger's smile vanished. He bowed stiffly and left. Elder Marcus stepped closer. "They won't accept this," he warned. "They'll attack." The king didn't blink. "I know." The first explosion hit before the elder finished breathing. Stone dust rained from the ceiling. Alarms screamed. A guard crashed into the throne room bleeding. "They're breaching the outer walls. They're attacking now." The court erupted into controlled chaos. Weapons drawn, orders shouted, fear turning into violence. The king barked commands. "Evacuate noncombatants to the lower levels. Fortify the gates." Naira moved toward Isolde's chair instinctively. "I'm not leaving her," she said. The king's eyes met hers, frustrated and fierce. "You are the target," he snapped. "Which is exactly why you stay near me," Naira shot back, surprising even herself. For a heartbeat they stared like two stubborn fires. Then the king cursed under his breath. "Fine," he growled. "Inner sanctuary, triple guard. If you die, I will personally haunt you." They didn't make it. The massive doors exploded inward, wood and iron shredding like paper. Shadowmere vampires poured into the hall like a black flood, fast, practiced, smiling. The defenders met them with blades and fangs. The throne room became a storm of steel and screams and blood. Naira grabbed the queen's chair and pushed, shoving through the chaos toward a side corridor while guards formed a shield around them. Then a figure stepped into their path, scarred, massive, eyes bright with recognition. Naira's stomach dropped because she knew him, the slaver, the one who branded her at 12. His grin was the same as in her nightmares. "The little rat who escaped," he purred. "Lord Cassius will pay handsomely for your return." One guard lunged. The slaver knocked him aside like a toy. Another Shadowmere vampire darted toward Isolde's chair, blade raised, not to kill but to threaten, to use the queen as leverage. Naira didn't think. She threw herself in front of the chair, arms spread wide again, her body becoming the only wall she knew how to build. The blade came down and sliced into her shoulder exactly where the brand sat. Pain detonated through her. She screamed but didn't fall. The slaver laughed. "Still stubborn," he said. "Good, stubborn ones break louder." And then the air changed. The next sound wasn't a scream. It was the clean, wet snap of a head separating from a neck. The attacker's body collapsed without understanding why it stopped existing. Blood sprayed the snow-melted stone. Darius Valorn stood there with a sword dripping dark blood, his expression not wild, not drunk with battle, controlled. Cold, final. He moved like death with purpose, carving through Shadowmere forces with surgical strikes, each swing protecting rather than punishing. Guards rallied behind him, pushing the attackers back. The slaver turned to run. Darius was already there, blade at his throat. "You branded children," Darius said quietly. "You profited from suffering." The slaver's bravado cracked. "Mercy," he begged. Darius's eyes didn't blink. "You will receive the same consideration you gave your victims." The blade fell. The slaver dropped. The Shadowmere line broke. But victory didn't feel like victory when Isolde's breathing turned thin and wrong. Naira sagged against the queen's chair, blood soaking through bandages that were already failing. The battle noise faded into distant ringing. Darius was suddenly in front of her, pressing cloth to her shoulder with hands that didn't tremble until you looked closely and realized they did. "You refused to hide," he said, voice tight. Naira swallowed pain and forced words out. "She needed me." Darius stared at her like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the lie. "Stubborn," he muttered again, but this time it sounded like respect wrapped in fear. Behind them the queen's head lolled. Her eyes fluttered, then opened clear for one brief, cruel moment. "Darius," Isolde whispered. The king spun to her instantly, catching her hand like he could hold her to life by force. "I'm here," he said. "I'm here." They rushed her to her chambers while healers moved like frantic shadows. But even Naira could see it in their faces. This wasn't an injury. This was an ending. The ritual was finishing the work it had started centuries ago. Darius sat by the bed holding his mother's hand with a gentleness that didn't fit the monster the world believed he was. Naira stood in the corner, shoulder wrapped, feeling dizzy from blood loss, watching a king look small for the first time. The healers finally stepped back, voices low. "Sire, we can keep her comfortable, but the final phase has begun." Darius's jaw flexed. "How long?" A pause. "Hours," the healer admitted. "Perhaps less." The king nodded once sharp, like accepting a blade into his chest without flinching. The healers left. The room fell quiet except for fire crackling and the queen's labored breaths. Then Isolde's eyes opened wider, sharp and painfully awake, as if the ritual was giving her one last moment to be herself before it swallowed her whole. She looked at Darius and didn't smile. She didn't rage, she just spoke like truth. "I know what you did," she whispered. The king's face cracked. "Mother, the ritual of silence," she said. "You signed my mind away to secure your throne." Darius flinched like he'd been struck. "I thought it was mercy," he choked. Isolde's voice stayed calm, and that calm was worse than anger. "It was fear," she said softly. "Fear that I would tear apart what you built. Perhaps I would have. I was angry, Darius. I was proud. We were both wrong." Darius's eyes burned red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," he said, the words raw, stripped of authority. "I would take it back, all of it." Isolde's gaze held him steady. "Would you?" she asked. "Would you truly unmake the peace you bought with cruelty? Would you return us to chaos because guilt hurts?" Darius's throat worked. He couldn't answer because the answer was the point. Isolde turned her head toward Naira as if pulled by warmth. "Come here, child," she whispered. Naira stepped forward, knees unsteady, and knelt by the bed. Isolde's papery hand found hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You gave me dignity," she said. "You saw an old woman dying in the snow and you didn't see a monster. You saw someone worth saving." Tears slid down the queen's wrinkles and vanished into the pillow. "I had power for centuries," she murmured. "And still I forgot the simplest truth. Worth is measured by what you choose when caring costs you everything." Naira's eyes filled. "You're worth it," Naira whispered. Isolde smiled faintly. "Yes," she breathed. "And so are you." Isolde looked back at Darius and her voice steadied for one final command. "She is my heir," she said. The court would have heard political madness in that sentence, but her eyes made it clear she meant something deeper. "Not the throne," she added. "The values mercy, protection, strength used to shelter, not dominate." Darius swallowed hard. "I understand," he said, and it sounded like a vow. Isolde's breathing slowed. Each exhale stretched longer. "I forgive you," she whispered. "But more than that. I'm proud of who you might become because of this girl's courage." Her eyes drifted between them like she was trying to memorize their faces before forgetting was permanent. "Power fades," she said. "Kingdoms crumble, but kindness remains." Then her eyes closed. Her chest rose once, then didn't. The silence after was so complete it felt like the world stopped moving out of respect. Darius sat motionless, still holding her hand, shoulders shaking with grief he'd held back for 2 centuries. Naira stayed kneeling, tears spilling, not just for Isolde, but for the idea that kindness could be rare in a world full of power. Finally, Darius released his mother's hand carefully like he was afraid to break the memory. He stood and the king mask slid back into place, controlled, cold, but the red in his eyes betrayed him. "She will receive full honors," he said. "A queen's farewell." Naira nodded, wiping her face with shaking fingers. "My wound is fine," she whispered when a healer tried to guide her away. Darius looked at her like she was an anchor he hadn't asked for but needed anyway. 3 days later, the funeral filled the ancient crypts beneath the stronghold. Vampires who hadn't spoken Isolde's name in years bowed their heads because death has a way of forcing honesty. Naira stood at the back with her backpack on her shoulders, the mended blanket folded inside, her mother's photo pressed against her chest like a heartbeat. After the ceremony, the stronghold buzzed with rumor. The king had called an emergency council session. The elders arrived ready for tradition. They left pale. Because Darius didn't just mourn his mother, he acted. In the council hall, Darius stood before the court and dismantled laws like they were rotten furniture. "The human hunting edicts are abolished," he announced. Gasps. "The trafficking agreements with neighboring covenants are dissolved." Outrage. "Any ritual council that authorizes mental erasure is disbanded permanently." The elders shouted. "You can't erase tradition. The other covenants will see weakness." Darius let them scream until their throats went raw. Then he spoke one sentence that cut the room into silence. My mother spent her final moments praising a homeless human girl who showed more courage and compassion than any vampire in this room. His gaze swept them coldly. If our traditions couldn't produce that, couldn't even recognize it, then our traditions deserve to die. At night, Naira waited until the stronghold quieted. Most vampires retreated from sunrise and the halls emptied. She didn't want drama. Drama was how you got caught. She packed her few belongings and walked toward the main gates with steady steps, refusing to look back. She told herself she didn't belong here. She was a human in a fortress built on human fear. The queen was gone. The war had ended. The king had changed. But change didn't erase scars. She reached the gates and a voice stopped her. Running away, Darius stood in the courtyard under the pale pre-dawn sky, not in robes, not surrounded by guards, just a man who looked tired in a way immortality couldn't hide. Going home, Naira said, and they both knew she had no home. What if home could be here? Darius asked. Naira's jaw tightened. I'm not a pet, she said sharply. I won't be kept as your redemption symbol. Darius nodded once, accepting the hit. I'm not asking you to be, he said. He stepped closer slowly, hands visible like he didn't trust himself either. I'm asking you to stay as yourself, on your terms, not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, not as a project. Naira stared at him, suspicious because promises were how cages were decorated. Why? She demanded. Your mother is gone. The covenant is defeated. Why do you care what happens to me? Darius's answer came out like it cost him. Because you changed me, he said. In 4 days, you broke 2 centuries of certainty. You showed me mercy isn't weakness, that protection isn't possession, that power without compassion is just a cleaner form of cruelty. He swallowed, eyes fixed on her like he was choosing honesty even though it hurt. And because my mother died calling you her heir of values, if I let you walk back into the streets, back into cold and hunger, then I learn nothing. I stay the monster she tried to stop. Naira's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. And if I leave tomorrow, Darius didn't hesitate, then I give you supplies, funds, safe passage, wherever you wish. The gates stay open, he said quietly, and then the real vow landed, not just for you, for anyone who needs shelter. The sunrise crested the horizon, spilling gold across black stone. Naira looked at the gates closed for centuries to humans like her and imagined them open. She imagined other girls like her not freezing outside full signs. She imagined not having to be invisible to be alive. She didn't forgive the world, but she could choose a different ending than the one it had written for her. Slowly, she set her backpack down. She lifted her chin. On my terms, she said firmly. Darius nodded, a king bowing to a human without calling it that. On your terms, he agreed. Naira extended her hand, not to a ruler but to someone learning. He took it, careful, as if he finally understood hands were meant for more than taking. And the decisive power shift line wasn't a threat. It was a rule that would change the world. From today, Darius said, voice carrying through the waking courtyard, no one is hunted under my rule, only protected. Now here's the moral dilemma I want you to answer in the comments. And I want you to pick a side. Should Naira forgive Darius for destroying his mother's mind if he spends the rest of his immortality saving people? Or is some evil too deep to ever earn redemption? Tell me what you think, and don't hold back. If you felt this story, do 3 quick things. Hit like, subscribe, and comment your answer so I can read it and reply. And if you want more cinematic vampire drama with brutal twists and emotional endings, click one of my other videos on the screen, because the next story is even darker and the betrayal hits closer to home.